Hey, what's going on, ASM? So good to have you guys with us, wherever it is you might be watching from or listening to this from. Just so glad to have you guys with us as we continue to go forward in our student ministry. Even though we might not be meeting physically in the building, we're still able to meet through technology, and so we're grateful for that. We are starting a new series tonight called Seeing Clearly. And pretty much the point of this new series is to shift our mindset and our thoughts and our perspectives really back to the heart of God, especially in this odd time that we're in right now. But in order to do that, we must be willing to confront the areas of our lives where we might have become vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. Again, especially in these times. And in doing so, we will be able to see clearly again that He not only has a plan for us, but that He never leaves us. And so that's kind of the outline of this new series that we're going to be taking part in over the next few weeks, is just shifting our mindset and our focus and our perspective back to the heart of God. And so really what I want to do is I want to just go over one story in the Bible that I love, and it takes part over multiple chapters throughout the book of Genesis, and so we're not going to have time to cover all of them in this message. And so I highly encourage you, take some notes, write down scriptures. I'm going to have them up here on the screen with me. But yeah, take notes, write down scriptures, and I encourage you to go back through and read these stories like for yourself. What is it that you can really get out of this? What more can you get out of it than what we're going to talk about tonight? I'm just going to kind of hit some highlights, but I really want to encourage you to just dive further in with God. And so the story that we're going to be talking about takes place from Genesis chapter 37 to 42. So again, that's like 5-6 chapters worth of material that we can't cover right now. But there's some high points, and there's some really good stuff in there that we're going to talk about, and I encourage you to continue in your walk with Him and continue in your growth with Him in your alone time, and just see what more He can show you in this stuff after this message is concluded. But we're starting this new series called Seeing Clearly. And really this kind of came to me last night, honestly. I was trying to figure out what is it that I want to talk to them about. Like, should we continue in our Let's Talk About It series? Should we do something else? And it hit me so like the Holy Spirit I feel like just dropped something in me. It's like, I think there are a lot of people out there that have kind of lost focus on God and kind of lost focus on His goodness and His kindness and all the good things that He does for us, all the good things that He's done for us in the past, and all the good things He's going to do for us in the future. Because of the weird time that we're in right now, where we're not able to go back to school, jobs and businesses are closing down because of the coronavirus and everything, people kind of tend to live in fear. And that's just kind of a human thing. And so what I want to do is I just want to talk to you today about not really living in fear. And let's shift our mindset, our focus, our thoughts back to the heart of God through all the ups and downs. And so what I want to do is we're going to go over this story of this man named Joseph. And so I have like a timeline here, and it kind of starts off like, right here, and then it goes way down, and then it kind of comes back up, goes down a little bit, then it kind of goes up for a little bit, and then it goes down again, and it comes way back up. And so I put this on here. It's really just a visual representation of just life in general. When you accept Christ into your life, it's not this uphill roller coaster that just continues to go up. No, like you're going to have troubles, you're going to have trials, you're going to have temptations, you're going to fall, you're going to mess up, and that's just part of it. And so in all of that, there's good and there's bad. That's just part of life. But a lot of times when the bad hits and when we start living in our mess-ups and start thinking, oh, well, God had promised me this, but I'm living in this, and so this doesn't look like what it should look like because He promised me this over here. No, we need to focus on God through it all. And let's just see what happens in this story of Joseph. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the timeline. So I have 13 separate events that we're going to talk about. So obviously the higher up is pretty much representative of how good everything's going. The lower down is kind of representative of how bad life is. All right. And so the first event that we're going to talk about is the fact that Joseph had a dream, and he told his brothers this dream. So Joseph's kind of living life, just going through it. Everything's cool. I say that's like 80% out of 100. Everything's good. And he has this dream, and he tells his brothers. Genesis 37, verse 5 through 7. It says, Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said, listen to this dream I had. We were all out in the field gathering bundles of wheat, and all of a sudden my bundle stood straight up, and your bundle circled around it and bowed down to mine. And so as the story goes on, Joseph has this dream about, his bundle of wheat standing up and all the other bundles of wheat gathering around and bowing down to him. And that's kind of symbolic of his brothers bowing down to him. And so Joseph had already kind of been considered the favorite of all of the brothers, and they were real jealous about that. They didn't really like it. And so when he told them his dream, they were all like, you think you're going to rule over us? Like, are you serious right now? And so they get jealous, they get mad. So that brings us to the next event, is that his brothers eventually plotted to kill him. Genesis 37, verse 17 through 18. It says, so Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. So remember, we started on the timeline like up here. Everything's cool, everything's chilling, Joseph's good, has a dream, tells his brothers, all right. Well, now his brothers are like plotting to kill him, and this is only like not even 10 verses later. And so now this dude's being plotted against like to be killed. So I would say that's probably a drastic down curve, or a downhill slope, because you're living life and now somebody's trying to kill you. So I'd say that's a little bit of a down, right? And so that brings us into the next event, is that Joseph was thrown into a cistern, which is kind of like a well. That's the best way I know how to describe it. That it's this, it's like this underground thing where water is supposed to be located. And so they didn't kill him. A guy convinced them not to kill him, but to throw him into the cistern. And so they did that instead. So he's not dead. So I say that's kind of like a little curve up. But Genesis 37, verse 23 through 24. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. And so I add that last part because, cisterns typically have water in them. But now Joseph is thrown into one that's completely dry. So not only is, he didn't die, but now he's thrown into this place where there's no water, no food. He doesn't know how long he's going to be there. So he was thrown into the cistern, but at the same time, there's no water. So, again, it's a little better, he's not dead, so it's kind of going up a little bit, but at the same time, I don't know. It's just, it's one of those things. Well, that brings us to the next point. The fourth event on the timeline is that he was actually sold into slavery. Genesis 37, verse 28 says, so when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. So I did the research, and so check this out. 20 shekels of silver is actually similar to like $200 in today's money. And so just think about that. Like this dude's brothers, this dude was sold into slavery for what is similar to $200. And so if that were me, I'd be a little irritated. Surely I'm worth more than $200, right? Maybe at least like $250. But $200? Man, that's just crazy. He sold us for $200. $200. It's kind of crazy. Well, now, he's in slavery, and as the story, as the chapters continue to go on, he ends up being bought by this man named Potiphar. Genesis 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And so, he was sold into slavery. That was, again, we started off high, but everything's kind of just been really low lately. It's just not really much. He's plot to be killed, sold into slavery, thrown into a cistern. Well, now he's bought by this man Potiphar. And that in itself may not seem like much at the time, but it really did kind of start a little an uphill thing for Joseph. And so, Joseph ended up having favor in Potiphar's eyes, and it goes on, chapter 39, verse 4. It's the next part, the next event that takes place, is that Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his household. 39, verse 4 says, Joseph found favor again in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. So now Joseph is going from, his brothers want to kill him to being sold into slavery to being bought by this dude. Well, now he's in charge of this guy's house. And that's pretty honorable in itself, especially since he was, just a slave. And so again, we're kind of back on the up and up. Just he started off here again, just a reminder, kind of went down, and now he's kind of coming back up a little bit. We talk a lot about there's mountains and valleys, and there's troubles and there's trials, but there's also victories, and there's good and there's bad, and so it's just part of life. And so Joseph is now in charge of Potiphar's household. Well, lo and behold, 3 verses later, Joseph gets tempted by Potiphar's wife. Verse 7, after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." And so now Joseph is being tempted by Potiphar's wife. And so it's kind of like the man can't really seem to catch a break, right? And of course, if you read the story, Joseph, refuses, ends up running out of the house. And Potiphar's wife actually blames Joseph. Actually, is like, he tried to come on to me. And so she's telling this to her husband. And now the husband, Potiphar, gets mad. And so he ends up finding Joseph and putting him into prison, which is the next event. He's put in prison. Genesis 39, verses 19 through 20. When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, "This is how your slave treated me." He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph got put in prison pretty much for no reason. He did everything right. He ran from the wife. He fled from her. She blamed him, and because of what she told the husband, now Joseph has to go to prison. So he just can't really catch a break, man. He started off and it dipped down. He finally kind of got back up, and now everything's going back down again. But one thing I want to point out in chapter 39 is and I found real interesting, was that there are 4 specific verses. There's 4 times where it mentions about the favor that God had for Joseph, and how when God was with Joseph, he was succeeding in everything that he did. And I find that interesting. I don't have it up here, but verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Verse 3, the Lord was with him and gave him success in everything he did. Verse 21, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. Verse 23, the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And I just found that interesting, that like in the middle of this story, in the middle of chapters 37 through 42 that we're talking about, that in the middle of chapter 39, for some reason, like it talks about the favor of the Lord on Joseph's life 4 specific times in that one chapter. And it kind of dawned on me, like, because if you're reading it from 37 to 38 to now 39, it's like, yo, this dude can't catch a break. But it hit me, it's like, how often are we like that in life too? Where like we feel like we can't catch a break, but we lose sight of the fact that God is still with us through the ups and downs, through the hard times and the good. Like God is with us through it all. And I think those 4 verses are just kind of a reminder that even though Joseph is going through all this mess, God is still with him. God gave him a promise. God gave him a dream back in 37 verse 5. We talked about the dream that he gave his brothers. There's a reason that Joseph is going through all this. I just thought that was interesting. Well, that brings us to the next event, is that he was forgotten. And so as the stories go, Joseph is in prison, and so, excuse me, the Pharaoh had a chief cupbearer and a chief baker. And so apparently they did something to make him mad, and he sent them down to prison where Joseph was. Well, both of them had a dream, and that was one of Joseph's gifts. He could interpret dreams. And so they told Joseph the dreams, and he interpreted them, and exactly what he said was going to happen. Well, Joseph was forgotten. The chief cupbearer and the baker are down there, and he interprets the dreams. He does all the stuff for them. But Genesis chapter 40, verses 14 through 15, and then we're going to skip to verse 23. It says, "But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness." This is Joseph talking. "Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing to deserve being out in a dungeon." The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. he forgot him. How many of you out there have ever felt forgotten? Whether it be from a friend, a family member, or even God. It's not a good feeling. And Joseph went through that. He went through being forgotten. And another thing that I love about this scripture is that for a moment, Joseph is going through all of this stuff, all of this mess. And in verse 15, where it says, I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I've done nothing to deserve being out in the dungeon. Just like Joseph has been living this life with God. And it's like he knows that he doesn't deserve to be in the place that he is. So he's like, remember me. Like, I haven't done anything to deserve being here, yet I'm here. And to me, I kind of relate to that. Just kind of being angry with the situations and the circumstances that are happening in life. It's like, I didn't do anything to deserve this. Like, why am I here? And so we start looking for help from other people. We start looking for help from other things, other places, whatever it might be. We start looking for all the help in all the wrong places. And I think for just a split second, there's just kind of a moment of weakness in Joseph where he's like, hey man, help me out here. But I get it. But it gets better. So Joseph was forgotten. Well, not only was he forgotten, but the story picks back up in chapter 41, and Pharaoh has a dream. Well, nobody can interpret the dream. This is 2 years later that Pharaoh had a dream. 2 years. 2 years that Joseph had been in prison waiting on somebody to come get him out, waiting on somebody to come back and say, hey man, I remembered you. 2 years where he had to just wait. He probably didn't know how long he was going to have to wait. He probably didn't even know why he was waiting. He probably didn't know what the heck was going on. I can tell you this though, it probably doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize if you tell somebody to remember you after the first day rolls around and the second day and the third day, it probably doesn't take too long to realize, all right, I'm not getting out. They forgot about me. So he was forgotten for 2 years. But I really believe that what happened in those 2 years really continued to set Joseph up for whatever was going to happen later on. So let's continue. Our next event on the timeline is Joseph's chance. Chapter 41, verse 9 through 14. Again, Pharaoh had a dream, needed an interpreter. Well, now the cupbearer remembers. Verse 9 says, Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, Today I'm reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream. And things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled. So Pharaoh went for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. So now Joseph gets a chance. After 2 years of waiting, he finally gets his chance. And what I love about this is that Joseph's down in the dungeon. He can't see what's going on the outside. All he knows about is what's happening where he is. And what I love about it is that in those 2 years, I believe God had been working and been putting the right things in order and taking the right steps and doing certain things and the right people to where eventually the cupbearer and the Pharaoh got to the moment where Pharaoh's like, I need somebody to interpret this dream. And the cupbearer's like, I know a guy. See, I believe God was working. Even though Joseph probably couldn't see it, even though he might not have felt it, even though he might not have known what the heck that looked like, God was still working. And so now, the next event on our timeline is Joseph's opportunity. Chapter 41, verses 15 through 16. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream and no one can interpret it, but I've heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it, Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. I love that. Because me, like if this is me, and finally, like after 2 years of waiting, somebody's like, hey man, This dude needs you to interpret this dream. I'm like, yeah, I got it. And Pharaoh's like, I need you to interpret this dream. I'm like, yeah, I got it. Tell me it. I got the interpretation. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I'm just going to tell you something so that I can get out of this prison. That's probably what I do, right? Like, I'm trying to just get out of where I've been stuck in for 2 years. But what did Joseph do? He took the time to give God the glory and seek him in the midst of being a prisoner. He says, I can't do it, but God will give you the answer that you desire. You see, too often we try to do things on our own. We try to handle situations how we want to. We try to just put our trust and our faith in ourselves and in other people instead of just really trusting God. Saying, I don't know what this looks like. I can't do this, but I know God can. I don't know what this dream, I don't know the interpretation of it, but God does. I don't know what it might look like in 10, 15, 20 years, but God does. And I'm going to trust in that. I love that Joseph experienced 2 years of being forgotten. 2 years of just being in a prison. And he finally gets a chance to get out, and he doesn't just seek after his own self. He continues to seek after God. And so now we're like in the uphill. If you remember the timeline, it started off at like 80, kind of went down, up a little bit. Well, now we're on the uphill. We're getting to the promise being fulfilled. And so now we're in the next event, is that Joseph is becoming the ruler of Egypt. This man who was once a slave, who was once wanted to be killed by his brothers, who was sold into slavery, who was put in prison, now he is the ruler of Egypt. Chapter 41, verse 41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And as time went on, the promise that God gave Joseph back in chapter 37, the dream that he gave him about his grain of wheat being stood upright and the other ones bowed down, was symbolic of his brothers bowing down to him. Now it's about to be fulfilled. Because in chapter 42, verse 6, the brothers bow down and the promise is fulfilled. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. What a story. And there's so much of this, there's so much that we don't have time to cover, but there's so much in the middle stuff that I really encourage you to just, in your own time, go back through, read chapters 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. Read it for yourself and just see all the stuff that led into everything. It's an incredible story. But the promise was fulfilled. The brothers had been told a dream 6 chapters ago. And they were like, are you crazy? We're not going to bow down to you. And 6 chapters later, here they are bowing down to him, the ruler of Egypt. It's insane. And one thing that I really got out of this whole message is really the point of the series that we're in. We've got to continue to see clearly that God loves us. He will never leave us. He will never forsake us. There's a reason that you're on this earth. There's a plan for your life. There are gifts and talents and abilities that God has put in you for a specific purpose. God gave Joseph a promise. He gave him this dream. And Joseph had to go through a whirlwind of mess and hardships. But because he remained faithful, the promise was fulfilled. And honestly, if he hadn't remained faithful, if he had just given up and said, I'm sold into slavery, forget it, forget everything, forget you, God, you give me this dream and now I'm in slavery, well, forget all this. If he had just given up, the promise most likely would have never been fulfilled. And so maybe that's a word for you today, is to just not give up. Despite all your ups and downs, despite all the mess that you're going through, despite all the lack of understanding for the situation that we're in right now with the coronavirus, despite all the lack of peace, despite all the lack of whatever it might be, the anger, the frustration, the bitterness, whatever it might be that is kind of seeped into your life, despite all of that, God has a plan for you. He has a plan for you. And if you give up, you might never be able to fulfill whatever it is He has for your life. Don't give up. Be like Joseph. Continue to be persistent. Continue to pursue God through the hard times, the good times, through the bad times, through the great times. Pursue God. It's not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's not about waking up now that we can't go to church and saying, oh, I did my online church. I prayed for 15 minutes today. I worshiped for 20 minutes today. I'm checking off this. I'm checking off that. I'm inviting a friend. I'm sharing this on Instagram. I'm sharing this on Facebook. It's not about looking perfect and being perfect. It's about persistence. It's about just continuing to push on no matter how hard it is, no matter how difficult it might be, no matter what you might see, no matter what you might not see. It's about being persistent and continuing to go after Him no matter what is going on in your life. Joseph never let his circumstances define who he was. He knew who God made him to be. He knew his gift, and he trusted that God would dictate the outcome. See, God cares more about who we're becoming than He does our circumstance. He cares more about who we're becoming, the person that we're becoming on the inside, than He does about the circumstances we're in. Well, Hagen, does He not care about the circumstances at all? No, He does. But if you let your circumstances and your situations and your feelings dictate the person that you are, I just don't know what to tell you. Joseph didn't let everything that was happening in and around him dictate who he was. He knew who he was in God, and so he continued to trust in that and believe in that, and eventually gained an amazing reward for it. And so tonight, as we kind of come to a close, I want to end with just this simple thought. And I think it just goes really hand in hand for getting our vision back on the right track and being able to just see clearly. And it's about prayer. You see, prayer is something we all desperately need, yet often neglect. Prayer is something that we desperately need, yet often neglect. I know there are times where I don't really feel like praying. I know there are times where I don't feel like doing a lot of things. But prayer is so important in our life. And I don't think we understand the gravity of how important it is. I came across this quote the other night that I want to share with you. And when I read it, it really just shifted some things in my perspective on prayer and just how I can really start utilizing my time to pray better, to pray more. The quote says, when I pray, I end up praying about things I think I should be concerned about. Missionaries, world peace, and global warming. But my mind keeps wandering towards stuff I'm genuinely concerned about. So the way to let my talking flow into praying is this. I must pray what is in me, not what I wish were in me. I love that quote. Because I think he's not saying like, don't pray for missionaries, don't pray for global warming, don't pray for peace. He's not saying that. He's saying like, I think for whatever reason, whether it be the church or whether it be, just people in leadership positions who are in high leadership positions and high authoritative roles. I know for me, like a lot of times when I pray, I try to sound like them. I try to be super spiritual. A lot of times when I pray, it sounds like, Father God, I come to you today and I just thank you for this day, and I just thank you for your goodness and your grace and your love and your mercy and your kindness and your forgiveness. And Father God, and that gets exhausting because I'm trying to live up to some kind of level that I don't even know the cap. Like, I don't know, because that's not me. It's just not. And if you do pray like that, like, that's great. I'm not bashing it at all. But what I am saying is that when we start making our time with God just part of our way of how we already live, then we will start to see things more clearly, the way that He wants us to see them. When you start just, instead of having to make extra time for God, when you just start including Him in the things that you're already doing, just casual conversations of prayer. I heard it from Chris Hodges one time, is that he prays in his car, he prays throughout the day, and it's not like this deep, holy prayer. It's just like, hey God, I'm just checking in, I'm doing good. I've got a dentist appointment coming up today. I just pray that you be with me in that. It's just like that. It's a conversation. And can I tell you that when I've had conversations like that with God, my prayer life is starting to pick up. When I just come to God and I don't try to be this and I don't try to be that, and I don't try to sound like Stephen Furtick, and I don't try to pray like Rich Robertson Jr., when I don't try to worship like this person, when I don't try to sound like this person, when I just am me, there's a whole lot more movement and a whole lot more stirring that goes on in my spirit. Because now it's me and God. It's not me trying to pretend to be somebody in God. It's me and God. Well, Hagen, why are you talking about prayer? Like, what does this have to do with this message with Joseph? I want to go back to the 2 years that he spent in the prison for God. See, it doesn't say it anywhere in the scriptures that Joseph spent that time praying. It doesn't say anywhere in there that this is what he did in those 2 years. But can I tell you, I believe that in that 2 years, Joseph probably spent a lot of time praying and having conversations with God and spending time with God. One reason I believe that is because he's in prison. There's probably not much else to do. Another reason I believe that is because if you've caught on to anything that we've talked about so far, is that Joseph lived a life of literal misery for a long time. And even in all of that, he never lost sight of God. And so I imagine when he did get forgotten by the cupbearer, he knew that he still wasn't forgotten by God. And so I believe that he prayed. And I think that all that time he probably spent praying is probably why when he got his chance and his opportunity to make something, to do something with that, he was so passionate, so straightforward on just saying, I can't do this, but God can. He had so much faith in God that that's who he put his trust in to get him out of the situation he had been in, instead of in himself. And so right now, whatever situation you're in, whatever circumstance you might be in, whether it's anger, rage, frustration about the coronavirus, and whatever it might be, if it's isolation, if it's boredom, if it's procrastination, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, if it's fear, whatever it is that you're dealing with, the enemy is slowly seeped into you. Don't let those circumstances, don't let those things dictate who you are. Don't let everything that's going on in and around you dictate who you are. God has a purpose for you. He has a plan for you. There are goals and dreams and things that he wants you to accomplish. And in order to accomplish those, you've got to keep pursuing. You've got to keep going. You've got to keep growing. Can't give up. And so as we wrap up tonight, I just want to pray you're listening to this and you say, Hagen, I hear you, and I've been dealing with some mess lately, man, and I know I haven't been myself, and I don't want to be like that anymore, though. I don't want to live like that anymore. I don't want to give up. I hear you. Or maybe you're listening to this and you say, well, Hagen, I've never even accepted Christ into my life at all. I've never accepted salvation. But I don't want to wait another minute and live my life without God. I want to ask Him into my life right now. Whoever that is out there, I just want to take a moment and just give you the opportunity to respond and receive. Maybe you've never responded before based on being in a room full of people. Well, now you're in your home. You're in your room, wherever it might be, by yourself. You have an opportunity to receive Christ into your life. You don't have to worry about anybody else. So I just want to take a moment and just let you respond and receive today. Thank you, Jesus. Father, I just thank you for this night. I thank you for this day, whatever time it might be that they're listening. I thank you for this word, and I just pray that we continue to be like Joseph, that we don't give up, that through the ups and the downs, that we continue to remember that you have a plan for our life, that you'll never leave us no matter what. So, Father, I just pray over those that made a decision to accept you for the first time, or maybe they made a decision to just say, you know what, I don't want to give up, and I don't want to continue to live the way that I've been living. I want to come back to you tonight. I just pray over each and every single person individually right now, God, that you continue to stir something in their spirit, that you continue to move in them. And I just pray that you set them up with the right people, with the right community to help them continue in their walk with you. I thank you for this message, and I thank you for helping us shift our focus and our perspective back to your heart. That there's something that you want to do in this time, and we want to be a part of it. So we thank you for who you are. We love you. We praise you. In your mighty and powerful name I pray. Amen. Amen. Hey, ASM, it's so good having you. I know this is definitely unique. It's different, but hope you enjoyed the message. Hope you got something out of it. Again, I encourage you, if you need to go back, this isn't a live video. You can go back on YouTube and pause it, go to wherever you need to take notes. But I encourage you, get back in the Word. Go through Genesis 37 through 42. Read for yourself. Go through the story of Joseph. What is it that God wants to talk to you about, including that? What does God want to talk to you about with that story? How does He want to move in your life using that story? And how can you better your walk with Him in it? Appreciate y'all listening. Looking forward to doing this again. I'll see y'all next week.